A locked closet, a forbidden room, a grandfather who took his secrets to the grave. When 72-year-old William Hartford passed away in his modest home in Richmond, Virginia, his family thought they knew everything about him. A retired accountant, a quiet man who loved fishing and Sunday dinners, a grandfather who smiled warmly but never spoke about his past. But 3 days after his funeral, when his grandson finally broke the lock on that basement closet, the one William had explicitly forbidden anyone from ever opening, everything they believed shattered like glass. Inside, they found passports with different names and faces that looked like William but weren't quite him. Photographs from Budapest, from Beirut, from Moscow during the height of tensions most people only read about in history books. Encrypted documents marked with stamps that made their blood run cold. And then, just as they were trying to process what they were seeing, a knock at the door. A man in a dark suit with eyes that had seen too much standing on their porch with a government badge. And a simple, terrifying request. I need what's in that closet, and I need it now. Your grandfather was protecting something that could destroy lives, including yours. What could be so dangerous that the CIA would come back for it decades later? What did William Hartford really do during those missing years of his life? And why did he hide it all in a locked closet, waiting like a ticking time bomb for his family to discover? The truth is more shocking than any spy novel and far more heartbreaking. The rain hammered against the windows of the Hartford family home on Monument Avenue, one of Richmond's most historic streets, lined with Victorian mansions and centuries-old oak trees. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy with grief and the musty smell of old belongings being sorted through cardboard boxes. Sarah Hartford wiped her eyes as she folded her grandfather's sweaters, each one carrying the faint scent of his cologne, mixed with pipe tobacco. Her brother, Michael, was in the basement, tasked with the unpleasant job of clearing out decades of accumulated items that their grandfather, William, had stored away. William Hartford had died suddenly at 72 from a heart attack while sitting in his favorite chair, a mystery novel open on his lap. The funeral had been small, just family, and a handful of neighbors who knew him as the quiet, friendly man who kept his lawn immaculate and always had candy for the neighborhood children. But William had always been private, almost secretive. There were gaps in his life story that he'd brush aside with a smile whenever anyone asked. Where had he lived before moving to Richmond 30 years ago? What exactly did he do before becoming an accountant? Why did he never talk about his younger years? Michael's voice echoed up from the basement. Sarah, you need to come down here, now. The urgency in his tone made Sarah's heart skip. She rushed down the narrow wooden stairs to find her brother standing in front of an old closet in the corner of the basement, one she'd never paid attention to before. It had always been locked, and William had been firm about one thing. That closet stays closed. Promise me you'll never try to open it. But now William was gone, and Michael had used a crowbar to break the rusted lock. The closet door hung open, revealing shelves lined with items that made no sense. Michael's face was pale as he held up a passport. This is Grandpa's face, but the name says Robert Morrison, born in Seattle. And look, there are 5 more, all with different names, different birthplaces. Sarah took the passport with trembling hands. The photo was definitely William, maybe 20 years younger, but the details were completely different. She pulled down a manila folder marked with a red stamp. Classified. Michael, this doesn't make sense. Grandpa was an accountant. He worked for a firm downtown. Look at these. Michael pointed to a series of black and white photographs pinned to a corkboard inside the closet. They showed William in various locations, standing in front of the Berlin Wall, sitting at a cafe in what looked like Paris, shaking hands with men in military uniforms she didn't recognize. There were maps with routes marked in red ink, encryption keys written on yellowed paper, a Leica camera that looked expensive and professional, and in a small wooden box, a pistol, a Walther PPK, clean and well-maintained, with a box of ammunition beside it. Sarah felt her knees weaken. What was he involved in? Before Michael could answer, they heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, measured footsteps that didn't belong to any family member. The doorbell rang. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. They weren't expecting anyone. Slowly, they climbed the basement stairs and approached the front door. Through the frosted glass, They could see the silhouette of a tall man in a dark suit. Michael opened the door cautiously. The man was in his 60s, with steel-grey hair and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. He wore a crisp charcoal suit and held a leather briefcase. His presence commanded immediate attention. "Sarah and Michael Hartford?" His voice was calm but carried undeniable authority. "Yes," Sarah answered carefully. "Who are you?" The man reached into his jacket, a movement that made Michael tense, and produced a badge. The letters CIA gleamed in the afternoon light. "My name is David Brennan. I was your grandfather's handler. I need to speak with you about what you found in his closet." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah gripped the doorframe for support. "Handler?" Michael repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Brennan's expression didn't change. "May I come in? What I have to tell you cannot be discussed on your front porch." Against their better judgment, but driven by shock and desperate curiosity, they let him inside. Brennan walked directly to the living room, as if he'd been there before, though neither Sarah nor Michael had ever seen him. He set his briefcase down and turned to face them with the practiced ease of someone who'd delivered difficult news many times. "Your grandfather, William Hartford, was not an accountant. Or rather, he was. But that was his cover for the last 30 years of his life. Before that, he was one of the most effective field operatives the CIA had during the Cold War. He ran operations in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Asia from 1965 to 1985. He saved countless lives and prevented conflicts that could have escalated into disasters." Sarah sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. He never traveled. He never even left Virginia in all the years we knew him. That's because he was given a new identity and placed in witness protection after his final mission went wrong. William Hartford isn't even his real name. He was born James William Morrison in Portland, Oregon." Michael's anger flared. "Why are you telling us this now? Why show up right after he dies?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "Because there's something in that closet that I need to retrieve. Something your grandfather was supposed to destroy decades ago, but couldn't bring himself to. And now that he's gone, that item poses a significant security risk, not just to national security, but to your family personally." Sarah felt ice in her veins. "What are you talking about? Your grandfather kept insurance, evidence of operations that were never officially acknowledged, names, dates, photographs. If that information gets into the wrong hands, people will come looking for it, and they won't be as polite as I'm being." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock, an ironic presence given the circumstances. "What do you want from us?" Michael asked. "I need you to give me everything from that closet. Every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence. I'll make sure it's properly handled and destroyed, and then you can go back to your lives, and your grandfather's secrets can stay buried where they belong." Sarah looked at her brother. Part of her wanted to hand everything over immediately to make this nightmare go away. But another part, the part that had loved William Hartford and cherished every moment with him, needed to understand who he really was before letting go of the only proof of his true life. "We need time," Sarah said finally. "This is a lot to process. Give us 24 hours. Brennan studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 24 hours. But understand this. Every minute that material remains in your possession, you're in danger. There are people who've been searching for your grandfather for 30 years. His death will have been noticed. They'll be coming." He picked up his briefcase and handed Sarah a business card with nothing but a phone number on it. "Call me when you're ready. And don't try to read those documents or share them with anyone. You don't want to know some of those secrets." With that chilling warning, David Brennan walked out of their lives as suddenly as he'd entered. Sarah and Michael stood in stunned silence, listening to his car pull away. "What do we do?" Michael whispered. Sarah looked toward the basement door, where her grandfather's secret life waited in the darkness. "We find out who he really was. We owe him that much." But neither of them knew that opening that closet had already set into motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever, and the most dangerous secrets hadn't even been discovered yet. If you want to know what happens next, make sure to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, comment below with your thoughts, and share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. Because what the Hartford family is about to discover will shake them to their core, and the truth about their grandfather is far more complex than any spy thriller could capture. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her old bedroom at her grandfather's house, the room she'd stayed in during countless childhood visits, staring at the ceiling and wondering how many lies had been told under this roof. At 2 in the morning, she gave up trying to rest and went down to the basement. Michael was already there, surrounded by documents spread across the concrete floor, a desk lamp casting harsh shadows across his exhausted face. "Couldn't sleep either?" Sarah asked. Michael shook his head. "I've been going through these files. Sarah, Grandpa's life was like something out of a movie. Look at this." He handed her a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakably William's, the same careful script he'd used to write birthday cards and shopping lists. But the content was anything but ordinary. March 15, 1972, Budapest. The asset finally agreed to defect. We have a 48-hour window to extract him before the KGB realizes he's gone. If we fail, he'll be executed, and 6 months of work dies with him. The risk is enormous, but the intelligence he carries could change the game in Central Europe. Sarah felt her hands trembling as she turned the pages. Entry after entry, detailed operations, close calls, moral dilemmas that would have destroyed most people. May 3, 1974. Beirut. Lost contact with Michael Chen today. He was supposed to check in at noon. It's now 8 p.m. I know what silence means in this business. He had a wife in San Francisco and a daughter who just turned 3. How do I write that report? How do I reduce a man's life to a casualty number? The entries revealed a man who carried immense weight on his shoulders, someone who made impossible decisions and lived with the consequences. Michael pulled out a stack of photographs. "Look at these. This is Grandpa in East Berlin, standing at Checkpoint Charlie, and this one, he's in Saigon during the war. Here he is in Tehran before the revolution." Each photograph showed William in different disguises, different contexts, always looking alert, always aware of his surroundings. In some photos, he was with other people, operatives, Sarah assumed, but their faces had been carefully scratched out, protecting their identities even in personal records. Sarah found a letter tucked into the journal, written in neat handwriting that wasn't William's. The paper was fragile, nearly transparent with age. "My dearest James," it began, and Sarah realized this must have been written to her grandfather using his real name. "I know you can't tell me where you are or what you're doing. I know that every time you leave you might not come back, but I need you to know that I love you and I'm proud of you, even though I don't fully understand what you're sacrificing for people who will never know your name. Please come home safe. Your son needs his father. I need my husband." The letter was signed Elizabeth and dated June 1970. "He was married," Sarah whispered. "He had a wife, maybe even a child. What happened to them?" Michael rifled through more documents until he found a death certificate. Elizabeth Morrison, deceased 1983, cause of death, car accident. And beside it, a smaller certificate. A son, David Morrison, deceased 1983, same date, same cause. The weight of that discovery settled like lead in Sarah's chest. Her grandfather had lost his entire family in a single moment. "That's why he went into witness protection," Michael said quietly. "That's why he became William Hartford and never spoke about his past. He had nothing left of his old life." Sarah picked up another document, a psychological evaluation dated 1985. Subject shows signs of severe PTSD and survivor's guilt following the loss of his family. Recommend immediate extraction from active duty and placement in domestic witness protection program. Subject possesses knowledge of 17 classified operations and 43 active foreign assets. He cannot be allowed to remain in civilian life without protection and monitoring. They didn't just give him a new identity to protect him, Sarah realized. They did it to control him, to make sure he couldn't talk about what he knew. Michael found a series of newspaper clippings from 1983. The accident that killed Elizabeth and David Morrison had occurred on a rainy night in Seattle. Their car had gone off a bridge. The official report called it a tragic accident caused by poor visibility and slick roads, but tucked beneath the clippings was a handwritten note in William's handwriting. "They made it look like an accident. I know they did, but I can never prove it. And even if I could, what would it change? They're gone. And it's my fault for bringing this life into theirs. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. The grandfather she'd known, the gentleman who taught her to fish, who made terrible jokes and always had time to listen, had been carrying this unbearable grief for 30 years. He never talked about it, Sarah said. He smiled and laughed and seemed happy. How did he live with this? Look at this entry, Michael said, pointing to a journal page from 1987, 2 years after William had become a new person in Richmond. I met my son's family today. He remarried before I went into the program, and I never knew. I have grandchildren, Sarah and Michael. They're beautiful. They'll never know who I really am, but maybe that's for the best. Maybe I can give them the grandfather that my own son never fully had. Maybe I can do something right with what's left of my life. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. William had known about them even before he'd officially become part of their lives. He'd sought them out deliberately, trying to build a connection to the family he'd lost. Wait, Sarah said slowly. If Grandpa was protecting us by keeping his distance, why did he keep all this evidence? Why risk having it found? Michael pulled out a sealed envelope from the bottom of a document box. It was addressed, "To my grandchildren, open only after my death." With shaking hands, Sarah broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Dear Sarah and Michael, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've found my closet. I'm sorry for the lies, I'm sorry for the secrets, but I need you to understand something crucial. The evidence I've kept isn't just about my past, it's insurance for your future. There are people in power who committed crimes under the cover of national security, people who ordered the death of assets, who knew too much, who silenced whistleblowers, who betrayed their own operatives to maintain deniability. I documented everything. If anything happens to me or to you, this evidence goes public. It's the only thing that's kept us safe all these years. Don't give it to Brennan. He's not who he says he is. Trust no one. Find the truth, and forgive me for the burden I'm leaving you. The letter was signed simply, William or James, your grandfather who loved you more than you'll ever know. Sarah and Michael stared at each other in the dim basement light, the full horror of their situation finally becoming clear. David Brennan wasn't there to protect them. He was there to retrieve evidence that could expose powerful people, and if they gave it to him, they'd lose the only leverage that was keeping them alive. We're in danger, Michael said, real danger. A sound from upstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Someone was in the house. Sarah grabbed the journal and Michael grabbed the envelope as they moved silently toward the basement stairs. The footsteps were coming from the kitchen, moving toward the living room. They weren't alone anymore. And whoever had come for William's secrets wasn't going to ask politely. What do you think about this revelation? Drop a comment below and let us know if you saw this twist coming, and stay tuned, because the danger is just beginning. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she and Michael crept up the basement stairs, each creak of the old wood sounding impossibly loud in the silent house. The footsteps above had stopped, which was somehow more terrifying than hearing them move. Michael reached the top first, peering carefully around the doorframe into the hallway. The house was dark except for a sliver of light from a car passing outside, casting moving shadows across the walls. Then a voice cut through the darkness, calm, measured, and chillingly familiar. "You can come out, I know you're there." It was David Brennan. Sarah felt a surge of anger override her fear. She stepped into the hallway, flipping on the light switch. Brennan stood in the living room, looking entirely too comfortable for someone who'd just broken into their home. "How did you get in here?" Michael demanded. Brennan held up a key. "Your grandfather gave me a copy years ago for emergencies." His eyes moved to the journal in Sarah's hands and the envelope Michael was clutching. "I see you've been doing some reading." "You lied to us," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "You said you were his handler, but that's not the whole truth, is it?" Something shifted in Brennan's expression, a crack in the professional facade. "Your grandfather told you about me in that letter. He told us not to trust you. He told us you're not who you claim to be." Brennan was quiet for a long moment, then moved to the window, checking the street outside with practiced vigilance. When he turned back, his face looked older, more tired. "You're right, I wasn't entirely honest, but neither was William." He gestured to the couch. "Sit down. If you've read that letter, then you deserve the full story. But we don't have much time." Against their better judgment, they sat. Brennan remained standing, his body language that of someone ready to move quickly if necessary. "I was William's handler. That part is true. We worked together for 15 years. He was the best operative I ever ran. Smart, adaptable, and surprisingly moral for someone in our line of work. But in 1982, we stumbled onto something that changed everything." He pulled out his phone and showed them a photograph, a grainy image of men in suits sitting around a conference table. "This is a meeting that officially never happened. These men, some of whom are still in power today, authorized Operation Silent Echo. It was a black operation designed to eliminate foreign assets who had become liabilities. The problem was, many of these assets were good people, double agents working for us, who had simply learned too much about illegal activities our own government was conducting." Sarah felt sick. They were executing their own people. That's exactly what William discovered. He found evidence that 3 operatives, people he'd worked with, people he'd trusted, had been terminated not by enemy forces, but by our own agency. And your grandfather being William, he couldn't let it go. He started collecting proof. "That's what's in the closet," Michael said. "Evidence of government-sanctioned murders." Brennan nodded. William was going to blow the whistle. He'd arranged a meeting with a journalist, someone he trusted, but then his wife and son died in that car accident. He paused, his voice dropping. William never believed it was an accident. He thought they'd been killed to send him a message. "Were they?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "I don't know," Brennan admitted. "The investigation ruled it accidental, but the timing was suspicious. William went into witness protection, not to hide from foreign enemies, but from his own agency, and I helped him disappear because I believed he was right. I believed the operation he'd uncovered was criminal." "So why are you here now?" Michael challenged. "If you were on his side, why do you want the evidence?" Brennan's expression hardened. "Because William's death was not from natural causes." The room fell silent. "What?" Sarah whispered. "The heart attack. It was induced. Someone got to him, someone who knew he was James Morrison, who'd been watching and waiting for the right moment. They killed him, and now they're searching for the evidence he kept. That's why I came as soon as I heard he died. I need to secure that evidence before they find it." "But Grandpa said not to give it to you," Michael protested. "William wrote that letter years ago before he knew if he could trust me completely. But in his final weeks, he contacted me. He told me that if anything happened to him, I should get the evidence to someone who could use it properly, not to expose everything and cause chaos, but to hold the right people accountable quietly, through channels that wouldn't destabilize the entire intelligence community." Sarah wanted to believe him, but everything she'd learned in the past 24 hours had taught her that trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. "How do we know you're telling the truth?" she asked. Brennan reached into his jacket again, slower this time, aware of their nervousness, and pulled out a photograph. It showed him and William together, both younger, both smiling, standing in front of a building Sarah didn't recognize. But it was the inscription on the back that made her breath catch. "David, if you're showing this to them, I'm gone. Help them finish what I started." "Jim." "He knew," Brennan said quietly. "He knew they'd come for him eventually, and he trusted me to protect you and to make sure his evidence didn't die with him." Michael stood abruptly, pacing. "So what now? We just hand everything over and hope you're one of the good guys." "No," Brennan said. "You make copies. You keep your own insurance just like William did. But the originals need to be secured in a place where they can't be destroyed or stolen. I have a safe deposit box in a bank that not even the CIA can access, without a warrant that would expose their own interest in it. It's the closest thing to neutral ground we have." Sarah looked at her brother. They were in over their heads, making decisions about things they barely understood, with stakes they could only guess at. "What happens to us if we do this?" she asked. "You go back to your normal lives. You inherit your grandfather's house, you grieve, you move on. The people looking for this evidence will eventually conclude it was destroyed or never existed. You become boring again, safe again." "And if we don't?" Michael asked. Brennan's silence was answer enough. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street where she'd spent so many happy summers, a street that suddenly felt much less safe than it had 24 hours ago. "We need a guarantee," she said finally. "Something that proves if anything happens to us, the evidence goes public automatically." Brennan considered this, then nodded. "I can arrange that. A dead man's switch. If you or your brother don't check in at regular intervals, the entire file gets sent to multiple journalists and congressional oversight committees simultaneously. It wasn't perfect, but it was something." "We'll need time to make the copies," Michael said. "You have until tomorrow night. After that, the risk becomes too great. There are already signs that his death has attracted attention. Strange cars on your street. Unusual inquiries into William's background. They're closing in." As if to punctuate his words, headlights swept across the living room window. A dark sedan pulled up across the street and parked, its engine idling. Brennan moved to the window, his body language instantly tense. "That's not one of ours." "How do you know?" Sarah asked. "Because I know all of ours, and that vehicle has been flagged in our system as belonging to a private security firm that does black bag work for the highest bidder." He turned to them, his face grave. "We need to leave. Now. Bring whatever documents you can carry." "We can't just abandon the house," Michael protested. "You can and you will. They're here to retrieve the evidence, and they won't hesitate to do whatever it takes. Your grandfather spent 30 years protecting you from this moment. Don't waste his sacrifice now." Sarah made a split-second decision. She ran to the basement, grabbed 2 bags, and started filling them with the most critical documents: the journal, the photographs, the files that seemed most damaging. Michael helped, working with frantic speed. Upstairs, they heard the sound of glass breaking. Someone had just come through a window. "Thank you so much for staying with us until this point. The story is about to reach its most intense moments, and we promise you, the best is yet to come. Keep watching." Brennan appeared at the top of the basement stairs, his hand inside his jacket, on a weapon, Sarah realized with a jolt of fear. Back exit, through the basement window, now. They didn't argue. Michael grabbed both bags while Sarah took the envelope with William's final letter. Brennan ushered them toward a small window near the ceiling that William had always said was for ventilation. Michael pushed it open and hoisted himself through, then reached back to pull Sarah up. Brennan followed with surprising agility for a man his age, closing the window behind them just as they heard footsteps pounding down the basement stairs. They emerged in William's backyard, the night air cold against their skin. Brennan led them through a gap in the hedge to the neighboring property, then through another yard, moving away from the house with practiced efficiency. "Where are we going?" Sarah whispered. "Somewhere they won't think to look. Stay quiet and keep moving." They wound through the historic neighborhood, using the shadows of ancient trees for cover. Behind them, Sarah could hear raised voices and the sound of more vehicles arriving. Whoever had come for the documents wasn't alone. Brennan led them to a church 3 blocks away, St. Paul's Episcopal, a beautiful Gothic revival structure that had stood since 1845. He produced another key. How many copies did he have to various places? And let them into a side entrance. Inside, the church was dark and silent, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through stained glass windows. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax. "We'll be safe here for a few hours," Brennan said. "The pastor is an old friend who understands that sometimes sanctuary means more than just spiritual refuge." They moved to a small office behind the sanctuary. Brennan locked the door and finally allowed himself to relax slightly, though his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. Sarah sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. This is what your grandfather lived with every day for 30 years, Brennan said quietly. The constant awareness that danger could come at any moment, the knowledge that his past could catch up with him. He did it to protect you." Michael set the bags on the desk and opened them, spreading out the documents. In the better light of the office, they could see more details: names, dates, operation codes. "Who are the people in these photographs?" he asked, pointing to a group shot of men in military dress uniforms. Brennan leaned over to look, and his face went pale. "That's General Marcus Thornton. He's currently the Secretary of Defense, and that next to him is Senator Raymond Caldwell, head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. If this photograph is from where I think it is, And if the date stamp is accurate— What? Sarah pressed. This was taken at a black site in Romania, a place that officially doesn't exist, where enhanced interrogations were conducted on high-value targets. If either of these men were present at that facility, it contradicts decades of testimony they've given under oath. He flipped through more documents, his expression growing darker with each page. William documented everything: dates of operations that were denied by official channels, names of operatives who were declared killed in action but were actually terminated by their own agency, financial records showing illegal funding streams. This could bring down the entire intelligence apparatus, Michael said in awe. Not the entire apparatus, Brennan corrected, but specific individuals who abuse their power and use national security as cover for criminal activity. That's what William wanted, not to destroy the system, but to excise the cancer within it. Sarah picked up a file marked with a red tab, William's system for flagging the most important documents. Inside was a detailed accounting of Operation Silent Echo, including a list of 12 operatives who had been eliminated. Next to each name was a notation in William's handwriting. David Chen, age 34, left behind a wife and daughter. Stephen Martinez, age 41, no family. Patricia O'Connor, age 29, engaged to be married. He'd humanized each one, made them more than just casualties or security risks. He'd remembered them as people. He carried this weight alone, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. For 30 years he knew all this and couldn't tell anyone. Not completely alone, Brennan said. He told me. And near the end he was working on a plan to finally bring it all to light. He'd found a journalist he trusted, someone with the platform and the courage to publish the story properly. Who? Michael asked. Before Brennan could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his expression hardened. They've taken apart your grandfather's house. They didn't find what they were looking for, which means they'll be expanding their search. How long do we have? Sarah asked. Until morning, maybe. They'll be watching all the obvious places, hotels, your homes, family members. We need to get these documents to the secure location and get you both out of Richmond. We're not running, Michael said firmly. Grandpa didn't run. Well, he did, but he didn't hide these documents. He kept them for a reason. If we run now, his whole life means nothing. Brennan studied him for a moment, then nodded with something like respect. Then we need to go on offense. We need to do what William was planning to do, get this evidence to someone who can use it. The journalist, Sarah said. You were about to tell us who it was. Brennan pulled out his phone and showed them a contact, Rachel Martinez, investigative reporter for the Washington Post. She broke the story on illegal surveillance programs 3 years ago. She's fearless, she's credible, and she has a lawyer who specializes in protecting whistleblowers. William met with her twice before he died. She's expecting the evidence. Then let's give it to her, Michael said. It's not that simple. Rachel is being watched. Ever since she published that surveillance story, she's been on the agency's radar. Any direct contact could compromise her and put her in danger. So how do we do it? Sarah asked. Brennan thought for a moment, then made a decision. There's a secure communication method William and I set up years ago, a way to transfer information without creating a digital trail, but it requires us to go to Washington, D.C., and it requires us to do it without being followed. That's a 2-hour drive, Michael said. They'll have checkpoints, they'll be watching the highways. Then we don't take the highways. I know back roads that aren't monitored, but we need to leave now, while it's still dark. Sarah looked at the documents spread across the desk. Her grandfather's legacy, purchased with decades of silence and suffering. The truth that had cost him his family, his identity, and ultimately his life. Let's finish what he started, she said. They repacked the bags carefully, making sure the most critical documents were distributed between them in case they got separated. Brennan made a quick phone call to someone he called Father Tom, presumably the pastor, thanking him for the sanctuary. As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look at the journal, flipping to the final entry William had written. March 10th, 2025. I'm an old man now and I can feel time running out, but I'm not afraid anymore. Sarah and Michael have grown into remarkable people, the kind of people who would understand why I did what I did, even if they never knew the full story. If you're reading this, my dear grandchildren, know that every choice I made, every lie I told, was to give you a life free from the shadows I lived in. Finish the work, tell the truth, and forgive an old spy for loving you too much to ever let you see the monster I had to become." Sarah closed the journal and held it against her chest. They slipped out of the church into the pre-dawn darkness, moving like ghosts through the streets of Richmond. Brennan led them to a nondescript Honda parked several blocks away, a vehicle that looked so ordinary it was practically invisible. As they drove out of the city on forgotten back roads, the sun began to rise, painting the Virginia countryside in shades of gold and amber. Behind them, the past. Ahead, an uncertain future. But for the first time since finding that closet, Sarah felt something other than fear. She felt purpose. The story is almost complete, but you need to stay until the very end to discover how this incredible journey concludes. If you've made it this far, you're clearly invested in William's story, and that means you'll love the other incredible stories coming to this channel. Subscribe now and hit that like button so you don't miss what happens next, because the final revelation will change everything you thought you knew. The safe house in Washington, D.C. was nothing like Sarah expected. It wasn't a shadowy government facility or a high-security bunker. It was a modest townhouse in Georgetown, tucked between a bookstore and a cafe, the kind of place where young professionals lived and tourists wandered past without a second glance. Rachel Martinez opened the door before they could knock. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a Georgetown University sweatshirt, looking more like a graduate student than an award-winning investigative journalist. "You're late," she said, but her tone was warm. "I was starting to worry." "We had company," Brennan replied, ushering Sarah and Michael inside quickly. The townhouse interior was deceptively sophisticated. What appeared to be a modest living room was actually equipped with signal jammers, reinforced walls, and a secure room where Rachel did her most sensitive work. "William talked about you both," Rachel said as she led them downstairs to her secure workspace. "He was so proud of you. He showed me pictures from your college graduations, Sarah's wedding, Michael's promotion. He carried those photos with him like talismans." Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes again. Even in his secret meetings with a journalist, planning to expose decades of corruption, William had talked about his grandchildren. The secure room was impressive. Multiple computer screens, document scanners, and a wall covered with notes and timelines. Rachel had clearly been preparing for this moment for months. "Before we begin," Rachel said, her tone becoming businesslike, "I need you to understand what publishing this story will mean. People will lose their jobs, careers will be destroyed. There will be congressional investigations, possibly criminal trials. The intelligence community will be in chaos for years." "Good," Michael said firmly. "They deserve it." "Maybe," Rachel agreed, "but there will also be collateral damage. Good operatives, ethical people who had nothing to do with these operations, will have their work compromised. Foreign assets who trusted us will be exposed and endangered. The ripple effects will be enormous." "That's why William waited so long," Brennan said quietly. "He wanted accountability, not destruction. He wanted surgical precision, not a carpet bomb." Rachel nodded. "Which is why I've spent the last 3 months building a story that focuses specifically on Operation Silent Echo and the individuals directly responsible. Not a broad indictment of the entire intelligence apparatus, but a targeted exposure of systematic abuse within it." She gestured to her wall of notes. "I've already corroborated much of what William gave me through other sources: whistleblowers, declassified documents, testimony from retired operatives. But what you brought today, the original documents, the photographs, the financial records, that's the evidence that makes this story bulletproof." Sarah and Michael emptied the bags onto Rachel's large work table. She began examining each document with practiced efficiency, occasionally asking Brennan questions about context or verification. But then Sarah noticed something. At the bottom of one of the bags, tucked into a small zippered pocket she hadn't noticed before, was another envelope. Smaller, personal, addressed simply, "For my grandchildren. The real truth." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single photograph and a letter written in William's careful handwriting, dated just 2 weeks before his death. The photograph showed a young woman and a little boy, maybe 3 years old. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair and a bright smile. The boy was laughing, his arms reaching toward whoever was taking the picture. Sarah turned it over. Written on the back, Elizabeth and David, 1971. The only treasure that ever mattered. She began reading the letter aloud, her voice breaking. My dearest Sarah and Michael, if you've found this, then you know most of my story. You know about my work, about the operations, about the evidence I kept, but there's something I need you to understand, something that changes everything. The closet was never really about the documents, it was about this photograph. You see, when Elizabeth and David died, I was destroyed. I blamed myself. I blamed the agency. I blamed the life I'd chosen. David Brennan, yes, the same man who's probably with you now, helped me disappear, gave me a new identity, tried to help me start over. But I couldn't. For years, I couldn't. I kept that photograph locked away because looking at it was too painful. The documents, the evidence, those were just things I couldn't let go of, because letting go would mean accepting that their deaths had been for nothing. But then I met you. Sarah, you were 7 years old with Elizabeth's eyes and her laugh. Michael, you had David's curiosity and his stubborn determination. And suddenly, I had a reason to keep living. I couldn't tell you who I really was. I couldn't explain why this stranger wanted to be part of your lives. But your parents, my son's widow and her new husband, they saw something in me, some desperate need to connect, and they let me in. They let me be Grandpa William. Every fishing trip, every Sunday dinner, every birthday card, those weren't cover. They weren't part of some operation. They were real. They were the only real things in my life for 30 years. The evidence I kept wasn't just about justice or accountability. It was my insurance policy to keep you safe. As long as powerful people knew I had documentation of their crimes, as long as they knew it would be released if anything happened to me or my family, you were protected. The closet wasn't about espionage. It was about love. And now I need you to make a choice. You can give this evidence to Rachel and let the world know what happened. Or you can destroy it all, walk away, and live normal, safe lives. I won't haunt you with guilt either way. I've made enough hard choices in my life. I won't burden you with mine from beyond the grave. But if you do choose to expose the truth, do it for the right reasons, not for revenge, not for me. Do it because some truths matter more than comfort, and some silences cost too much to keep. Whatever you decide, know this. Being your grandfather was the greatest honor of my life. You gave an old spy a reason to believe in something pure again. You gave me a family when I thought I'd lost the right to have one. I love you both more than any classified document could ever express. Your grandfather, William, formerly James, forever grateful. The room was silent, except for Sarah's quiet crying. Rachel stepped back from the documents, giving them space. Even Brennan looked away, his professional composure cracking. Michael picked up the photograph of Elizabeth and David, studying it carefully. He carried this pain for 30 years, and still managed to be the best grandfather we could have asked for. He compartmentalized, Brennan said softly. It's what we're trained to do, separate the different parts of our lives, keep them from bleeding into each other. But William was better at it than anyone I've ever known. He turned his pain into purpose. He channeled his grief into protecting you. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at the documents spread across the table. Decades of secrets. Enough evidence to shake the foundations of government power. Then she looked at the photograph of Elizabeth and David, frozen in a moment of joy that had been stolen from them. What would Grandpa want us to do? She asked. I think, Rachel said gently, he'd want you to do what feels right to you. Not what you think he'd want, or what would honor his memory, but what you can live with. Sarah and Michael looked at each other, that wordless communication that siblings develop over a lifetime. Tell the story, Sarah said, but tell all of it. Not just about the operations and the corruption, tell about who William Hartford really was. Tell about the operative who became a grandfather. Tell about the man who carried impossible secrets and still made time to teach his granddaughter how to bait a fishing hook. Tell about the cost, Michael added. Not just the political cost or the institutional cost, but the human cost. What it does to people to live in shadows, what it takes from them. Rachel smiled, a sad, knowing smile. That's exactly the story William wanted me to write. He said people needed to understand that intelligence work isn't glamorous. It's tragic, it's necessary and tragic, and it destroys the people who do it well. She began organizing the documents into categories, her journalist's mind already structuring the narrative. This will take a few weeks to verify everything and write properly. You'll need to stay in protective custody during that time. Once the story breaks, there will be intense scrutiny, possibly legal proceedings. Your lives will change. They already have, Sarah said. Brennan's phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression tightened. The Richmond house has been completely searched. They're expanding to family members and known associates. We need to move you to a more secure location. Where? Michael asked. There's a cabin in West Virginia, completely off-grid. You'll be safe there while Rachel finalizes the story. After publication, we'll reassess your security situation. Sarah looked around the secure room one last time, at the evidence that represented her grandfather's secret life, at the photograph of the family he'd lost, at the journalist who would finally tell his story to the world. Before we go, she said, I need to know one thing. The car accident that killed Elizabeth and David, was it really an accident? Brennan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with old regret. I investigated it myself, quietly, after William went into protection. The brake lines had been tampered with, very professionally, almost undetectably. By the time I had confirmation, the investigation was closed and the evidence was gone. So they were murdered, Michael said flatly, almost certainly. But I could never prove it. And William knew that even if we could, bringing it to light would only put more people he cared about in danger. So he lived with the knowledge and channeled his rage into documenting every other crime he could find. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the grandmother and uncle she'd never known, rage at the people who'd killed them, and overwhelming respect for the grandfather who'd somehow transformed that tragedy into protective love for her and Michael. One more thing, Brennan said, pulling out a small box from his jacket. William left this for you. He gave it to me 6 months ago, with instructions to deliver it only if something happened to him. Inside the box were 2 items. William's wedding ring from his first marriage, worn smooth with age, and a small brass compass. He carried that compass on every operation, Brennan explained. He said it reminded him that no matter how lost he got in the shadows, he could always find his way home. He wanted you to have it. Sarah took the compass, feeling its weight in her palm. The brass was tarnished, the glass face scratched from decades of use, but when she opened it, the needle still pointed true north. Let's finish this, she said. 3 weeks later, Rachel Martinez's story broke simultaneously in the Washington Post and across major news networks. The headline read, Operation Silent Echo, How a Covert Program Eliminated Its Own Operatives and the Spy Who Documented It All. The article was masterful, meticulously researched, carefully sourced, and devastating in its revelations. It named names, provided documentation, and included testimony from multiple whistleblowers who came forward once William's evidence made it safe to do so. But it also told William's story, the operative who'd lost everything, who'd been given a second chance at family, who'd protected his grandchildren while simultaneously building a case that would outlast him. The response was immediate and massive. Congressional hearings were announced within hours. The Secretary of Defense resigned. 3 high-ranking intelligence officials were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But there was something else, too. An outpouring of support from retired operatives, from families of the eliminated agents, from people who'd spent decades wondering what really happened to their loved ones. Sarah and Michael watched from the safe house as their grandfather's story spread across the world. Their phones, new ones with secured lines, rang constantly with interview requests. He'd hate this attention, Michael said. No, Sarah corrected. He'd hate attention for himself, but he'd love that the truth is finally out, that the people he documented are being held accountable. A week after the story broke, a package arrived at the safe house, forwarded through several secure channels. Inside was a letter addressed to the grandchildren of James Morrison. It was from a woman named Catherine Chen, widow of one of the operatives eliminated in Operation Silent Echo. Dear Sarah and Michael, it read, I never knew what really happened to my husband. For 40 years I believed he died in a training accident, the way they told me. But your grandfather documented the truth. He remembered David as a person, not just a casualty. Because of William's courage, I finally know my husband died serving his country, not abandoned by it. Thank you for finishing what your grandfather started. Thank you for giving us all the truth, even when it cost you everything to do it. There were 19 more letters like it, from families who'd finally gotten answers. Sarah kept them all, storing them carefully alongside William's journal and the photograph of Elizabeth and David. 6 months after the story broke, the initial chaos had settled into ongoing investigations and policy reforms. The Intelligence Community Oversight Act was passed, creating new protections for whistleblowers and new accountability measures for covert operations. Sarah and Michael returned to Richmond, to their grandfather's house, which had been meticulously cleaned and repaired by contractors Brennan had hired. The basement closet stood empty now, its secrets finally released. But they didn't leave it empty. Sarah placed the photograph of Elizabeth and David inside, along with William's journal, the compass, and the letters from grateful families. Not hidden this time, displayed. A shrine to a complicated man who'd lived an impossible life with as much integrity as he could manage. Above the closet, Michael hung a small brass plaque that read, "Some secrets are kept not to hide the truth, but to protect the ones we love." On the anniversary of William's death, they held a small memorial service in the backyard where he'd taught them to fish, where he'd told terrible jokes and made them feel safe. Rachel came, and Brennan, and some of the families who'd been given answers. Father Tom from St. Paul's Episcopal said a few words about sanctuary and redemption, about how even those who work in shadows can find light. As the sun set over Richmond, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Sarah stood by the garden William had maintained so carefully. She took out the brass compass, opened it, and watched the needle find north. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered, "for everything you did, for everything you sacrificed, for loving us enough to carry impossible burdens so we wouldn't have to." The compass needle held steady, pointing the way home. And for the first time since finding that closet, Sarah felt truly at peace. Not because the story had a happy ending, though in its own complicated way it did, but because the truth had finally been told. The silence had been broken. The shadows had been pierced by light. William Hartford, formerly James Morrison, could finally rest. His secrets were no longer locked away. His love was no longer hidden. And his grandchildren understood, finally, that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not the missions you complete in the darkness, but the choice to keep living, keep loving, keep hoping when everything has been taken from you. The closet had never been about espionage. It had always been about a grandfather's love, fierce, protective, and eternal. We hope this incredible journey through William's secret life touched your heart as much as it touched ours. This story reminds us that the people we think we know often carry depths we can't imagine, and that love sometimes requires sacrifice we'll never fully understand. Now we want to hear from you. What would you do if you discovered a secret like this about someone you loved? Would you expose the truth or protect their memory? Drop a comment below telling us what you think, and don't forget to share your name and what city and state you're watching from. We love connecting with our viewers from all over. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have so many more incredible emotional stories coming that you won't want to miss. Stories of ordinary people living extraordinary lives. Stories that will make you think, feel, and see the world differently. And don't go anywhere yet. We have another amazing story queued up for you. Just click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, remember, every person has a story worth telling, and every secret kept comes with a price.